It's the third day of Vlog Every Day April, and it's been quite eye-opening seeing how hard it is to make a video that's not terrible. But I guess today I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening politically. I've been watching what's happening in the House of Commons on the live feed all day while I've been working. I've just finished work. Aside from being interested in the outcome, I'm also kind of fascinated by the rules that they play by and the debate structures as a kind of game. And one of the rules that particularly interests me is that members of parliament are not allowed to accuse other members of lying. And it totally makes sense. Like, I know when I've been in arguments with people, it's really frustrating when it becomes clear that someone thinks I'm being insincere. Either they directly accuse me of lying, or they, make statements that seem to bring my good faith into question. Because at that point, it doesn't really matter what you say to somebody, right? Like, if they don't believe you, then you're wasting your breath. The typical, asking someone if they're a spy, and then they say no, and then, that's exactly what a spy would say. So I think this principle that you can't accuse somebody of lying in a debate in Parliament makes a lot of sense. But it's also really frustrating, right? Because politicians lie quite a lot. And so sometimes I've seen people handle this kind of quite deftly, where they have to respond to a mistruth with the truth, or to ask for clarification because what the person's saying is confusing, or something like that. And I think it's some really interesting kind of discursive judo moves that are going on in there. But it also raises another question for me that I don't think is actually part of what's going on for politicians when they're playing this game. But as someone watching it and thinking about what I can learn from it, it makes me think, how do I reimagine the other person so that I have a narrative that doesn't involve them lying? I find it quite difficult to be insincere, I guess. So if I'm going to conduct myself in life in a way that involves not accusing someone of lying, then I actually have to push myself to imagine motivations that people might have for saying the things that they say, that aren't just they're trying to mislead people. And I had a moment watching the debates today where it became kind of quite poignant. So a Conservative backbencher was talking about the reasons why he believes his constituents voted Leave. And he's presenting it as fact. It's his opinion, but he's saying it as if it's like a matter of fact that people wanted X, Y, and Z. And you hear this a lot from people who are in favour of leaving the EU. They'll make quite a lot of claims for what people wanted when they voted Leave. And it's interesting because it seems quite obvious that anything you say about the motivations of millions of people who you've never met is going to be pretty spurious. But they do it quite a lot. So it's frustrating for me because, I see him saying these things, and because to me it seems so obviously untrue, my instinct is to imagine that he's putting these arguments forward in a very cynical way. That he's crafted a self-serving narrative about why people voted the way they did, and he's trying to spread that narrative at every opportunity, even when it's not totally relevant. And I kind of want someone to call him out for being untruthful, but they can't do it. But then I thought, well, if I challenge myself to imagine another reason why he might be saying this, what happens? Like, does this get more interesting? So, can I imagine that he sincerely believes that, for example, everyone who voted Leave um, was willing to pay an economic price for the symbolic and emotional win of no longer being a part of this European community. And it's not that hard to imagine someone believing that. And if that's what he believes, what's the appropriate response? It's certainly not turning around and accusing him of lying, because that's going to get him really defensive and lead to those feelings of frustration that I can't talk to you about this because anything that I say to you, you'll accuse me of lying about, when actually I'm defending the position I am because I sincerely believe this thing. I imagine that there's something more interesting that can happen cognitively if I just try on another person's point of view for a while. Like, if I try on that opinion, that view, that there are millions of people in Britain who have a very emotional and meaningful connection to the idea of leaving the EU. And although I say emotional and that sounds quite undermining, I need to try on this worldview that people's subjective sense of connection to nationhood is actually incredibly important. I don't hold that worldview personally. I need to try it on in order to understand that point of view being shared by Brexiters. Actually, it's not that hard to try it on because there's lots of other issues where, we differ, where I'm the one who's defending a subjective, emotional position as actually fundamental and not to be hand waved away with economic statistics or whatever. Things like gender identity, the ability to self-actualize. I would pay an economic price for issues like that. And so I think I can imagine that worldview that people have voted to pay an economic price for their national identity. Again, I don't think it's necessarily true. I don't think anybody knows the motivations of all of the people who voted leave. I think I can, in my own mind, operate with a kind of more complex imagining of the people who I disagree with, where they're not simply telling lies, but they believe in intangible things that have led them to the position that they're at.